Earlier on, I spoke with UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, and we discussed the ongoing crisis in Gaza and how it's affecting people's lives on the ground.
What happened on the 7th and the 8th of October is horrific. But it is also horrific if you look at the current situation in Gaza. We see the collapse of the humanitarian system. You have to imagine there are people who have been displaced for the fifth time. My own colleagues who work there have become victims. They tell me about family members being killed. They tell me that their heavily pregnant wife, they don't know where she's going to give birth, for example. So we really need to focus our attention on how to bring an end to this violence, how to bring an end to this carnage, and how to make sure that humanitarian aid gets to the millions of civilians that are living under extremely precarious circumstances. And I hope that there will be a ceasefire on human rights and humanitarian grounds, because that's what the civilians need the most at this point.
You speak about the dimensions of what we've seen in Gaza, but Mr. Turk, we don't have an entire picture of exactly what's happening in Gaza. I mean, media presence there has been severely limited. Israel has banned, in fact, international journalists from actually reporting from the Strip. The scope of the assaults on October the 7th as well by the militants, that is still being determined. Israel has released some details and evidence of what they see to be a litany of atrocities. But it's also accused the United Nations of ignoring the pain of Israeli victims. Now, Mr. Netanyahu's government, Mr. Turk, denied your request to enter Israel or even the occupied territories. How can the UN achieve this full and complete investigation into all crimes that may have been committed in the absence of that independent access?
So it is absolutely important that, first of all, there are independent investigations, especially when there are contested narratives. That's absolutely critical. We have already the International Criminal Court looking into it. We have the Commission of Inquiry doing it. We have my own office doing all its work in monitoring, in documenting and reporting. But of course, it is curtailed by the fact that we do not have access to Israel at the moment, and that we actually need to be able to sit down with victims, with survivors, interview them, both when it comes to the situation of what happened on the 7th and the 8th, but also when it comes to the situation in Gaza. Of course, we can do a lot of monitoring. We also need to analyze the figures that we get. For example, the fact that you have over 7,000 children having been killed, that you have over 4,800 women being killed in Gaza, gives us a very strong indication that something is terribly wrong here when it comes to the respect for international humanitarian law.
That being said, Mr. Turk, Israeli officials have attacked Mr. Guterres in the invocation of this article, calling his letter a new moral low, and that he's a danger to world peace, and that the invocation itself may well be anti-Israel. Talk to me about the dangers of that kind of narrative, that to want an end to the killing of innocent Palestinians or to argue for their rights, their human rights, somehow discounts atrocities of October the 7th, or even to be labeled anti-Semitic?
I mean, it is absolutely clear that the vilification of anyone doesn't help us. We are in a very polarized situation at the moment, and it is extremely important to come back to reason, to come back to solutions, to think of how we can come out of this incredibly awful situation, not just for Israel and the Palestinians, but also for the region and for the world. And my call is to come back to senses and to engage with the substance and to find a solution. Nothing helps us if you dehumanize, vilify, or attack the other in a way that is not constructive. We need to go back to reason when it comes to this type of situations.
You've also said that in these circumstances, Mr. Turk, that there is a heightened risk of more atrocities being committed, of atrocity crimes. In your mind, has the risk of genocide also been elevated in Gaza?
Look, when it comes to genocide, this is obviously for a court of law to determine, because this is a very complex legal issue. What we see at the moment is dehumanizing language on the part of Hamas, but also on the part of political and military leaders, some in Israel. When it comes to dehumanization of the other, that's always a wake-up call, and we need to be very clear that this should not in any way lead to incitement, to more hatred and to more violence. But we also see we saw what happened in Israel. Horrific, to be condemned. But we also see what happens to the Palestinians as we speak. And the facts speak for themselves. And I only hope that reason comes back, that we are not in this binary mindset of either you're for me or you're against me. We all need to find a solution. And that's what human rights is at the end all about.
We do need a solution for both sides, Mr. Turk. The WHO has warned that it's now almost inevitable that we will see more people dying, though, from disease than from bombardment in Gaza. We've got 80%, maybe more, of people in Gaza who've been displaced. They have no true safe zones, it would appear. We've seen these stories of loss, of grief mount every day, as you've articulated. And in all of that, Mr. Turk, the people of Gaza, they feel forgotten. What is your message to them not to lose hope?
Well, I have to say, we need to make sure that the world wakes up, that there needs to be a cessation of hostilities again, and there needs to be all efforts, all hands on deck to find a solution for everyone who has any influence over the parties to make sure that they understand that they are on the precipice and that we need to work together to find a solution. The only way out is for peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. And I know this is extremely difficult to say at this point in time, but that's the only solution. There's no way then going through that. And all those who believe in a solution need to work on it urgently.